Good afternoon, everybody. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 39 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today, we will continue our study on application backlogs and processing times. I would like to welcome our witnesses for appearing before our committee today. Today, we are joined by Yves Gerard, Mehul Loka, Vice President, and also we are joined by Alain Dupe, Director General, Fédération des Communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada. Our second witness for today is Mr. Peter Bhatti, Chairman, International Christian Voice. And our third witness for today is Shelley Gilbert, Coordinator, Social Work Services, representing Legal Assistance of Windsor. Welcome to all the witnesses. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will start with Mr. Mehu Loko, representing Fédération des Communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada. Floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for inviting us to appear today. My name is Yves Gérard Méouloko. I'm Vice President of the Fédération des Communautés francophones et acadiennes, the FCFA, and with me is our Director General, Alain Dupuis. The FCFA is the national voice of 2.8 million French-speaking minority citizens living in 9 provinces and 3 territories. It has a history of nearly 5 decades of language rights and French language advocacy, and it is the driving force behind immigration issues in Francophone and Acadian communities. In 2003, the government and the communities jointly set a target to ensure that 4.4% of immigrants admitted to Canada from outside Quebec would be French-speaking. That target was to be attained by 2008, but in 2006, the government announced that it was postponing the deadline by 15 years, primarily because there was a considerable backlog of applications already in the system. The government has never been able to make substantial progress towards the target. Numbers have stagnated at under 2% for most of the last decade. Last year, the Commissioner of Official Languages estimated that the Francophone minority community could have welcomed 76,000 more immigrants had the target been met in 2008. Express Entry, the main recruitment tool for economic immigrants, is not designed to support Francophone immigration. It is a general immigration mechanism to which some adjustments have been made to take into account knowledge of French. But to date, this has proved insufficient. At the very least, there should be a selection quota for French-speaking immigrants in Express Entry. Moreover, French-speaking applications should be assessed in relation to one another rather than in relation to general applications. However, it would be even better to set up a separate economic immigration program tailored to meet the needs and circumstances of Francophones. Francophones are also penalized by the lack of capacity to process applications from sub-Saharan Africa, particularly with respect to family reunification and student visas. A single office in Dakar, Senegal, processes applications from 16 countries. Census figures last week show the scale of the problem. If we look at the top 20 countries from which French-speaking immigrants outside Quebec come, we can see just how serious the problem is. Only 2 countries served by the Dakar Visa Office are listed: the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Cameroon. Given the huge pool of Francophone immigrants in sub-Saharan Africa, Canada can and must do much better. There is an urgent need for the government to open more processing offices in sub-Saharan Africa. Given 2 decades of failure by Canada to meet the 4.4% target, that target is no longer the right one. It will not restore the demographic weight of Francophones and minorities communities. Last April, the FCFA asked the Government of Canada to implement a progressive catch-up target, which would start at 12% in 2024 and reach 20% by 2036. This would correct for the damage caused since 2003 and put our communities back on the path to growth, increasing visa processing capacity in French-speaking countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, removing barriers to international student visas. Both are essential measures in attaining the catch-up target. Canada would also need to create specific components for economic immigration, family reunification, and the provincial nominee program. A francophone component for the refugee support program would also be appropriate. Lastly, we would need to strengthen the capacity of our communities to act on the entire continuum of francophone immigration, from promotion to selection, settlement, and inclusion. Our communities are therefore looking to IRCC for concrete measures and tangible action. This is how Canada will fulfill its commitment to francophone immigration set out in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Bhatti, representing International Christian Voice. He is the chairman. Mr. Bhatti, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to present our concern as a sponsorship agreement holder with the private sponsorship program. International Christian Voice, or ICV, is a registered non-profit charitable human rights organization. Our core work is to assist individuals and families that have fled religious persecution and are stranded in the third countries with little or no hope. My family and I personally suffered from the religious persecution. My youngest brother, Shahbaz Bhatti, was the only Christian federal minister in government of Pakistan and was assassinated by religious extremists in March 2011. Since 2016, ICV submitted more than 100 sponsorship applications. The average waiting time of the completion of the sponsorship process has been 3 years or more. I would give you one example, which is worth to give you today. One refugee family fled from their homeland due to the religious persecution in 2013 to Thailand. ICV submitted their file in April 2017. The family was called for an interview September 2019. The case was refused in March 2020. Family fell into depression and was involved in an accident in which he was killed. He left behind a young wife and 4 daughters. After judicial review, upon reapplying, their application was accepted and his family came to Canada this year. The family suffered 9 years and lost head of the family. Our concerns. Application backlogs and processing time is the major concern for the sponsorship agreement holders and for the refugees and the asylum seekers who continue to suffer while waiting for the process of approval. In our experience, most of the refugee asylum seekers who have been persecuted to their faith are from low-income backgrounds, have very little education and lack of effective communication skills. They are at a significant disadvantage when trying to effectively share their stories of persecution with visa officers, which can lead to the refusal of their applications. Some causes and recommendations. It appears that lack of sufficient human resources may be the root cause of the delay today. We see that due to the unexpected political crisis, wars, and natural disaster around the world, the same human resources handling immigration cases are pulled to respond to the new crisis. This delay or put on hold the application of those who are waiting their turns and causing massive backlog. We strongly request that the dedicated number of staff be appointed to handle PSR application and other routine immigration activities, pulling away resources or adding an additional workload on this staff should be prevented. Visa officials should be introduced to and made reasonable aware of the culture, demographic, and political and religious conflict of the countries where refugees are coming from. Video recordings of interview have verified incorrect interpretation and conversation during interview between visa officers and applicant. We are grateful to the Canadian government for playing an important role on the world stage to assist refugees and asylum seekers. However, we as sponsorship agreement holder are facing many challenges with our applications, which is causing prolonged suffering and pain of those who are trying to help. We would welcome to greater initiative by the government to address these issues as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatti. We will now proceed to Ms. Shelley Gilbert, Coordinator for Social Work Services, representing Legal Assistance of Windsor. Ms. Gilbert, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
I would like to thank the members of the committee for the invitation to speak on this very important topic. In preparation for today, I have both spoken with other service providers and reflected upon the experiences of the people I've had the privilege of working with. Chairperson, the delays in processing through immigration offices, both in Canada and in our visa offices abroad, are having a dire effect on the mental health of families asking for our help. Legal Assistance of Windsor is a legal aid funded clinic where social workers, social work students, lawyers, and law students provide a range of services to our community. As a community heavily enriched by immigration over the past 50 years, we work closely with newcomers, migrant workers, survivors of human trafficking, and refugee claimants in their settlement in Canada and to reunite with their families. An issue I would like to raise today is the processing of dependent family members of protected persons. As of Friday, October 28th, the average processing time for protected persons applying for permanent residence is 21 months. This 21 months is in addition to the time involved in the processing of refugee claims. Essentially, families who have experienced violence and separate due to persecution are waiting years to be reunited through the immigration process. In the meantime, separated family members abroad often face the same danger which led their relatives to flee. Of particular concern in my practice is the experience of women who have faced intimate partner violence and were forced to leave their children behind to seek safety. Facing extreme violence, women leave without their children due to custody issues, the inability to apply for passports, or due to the limited resources available to women with children fleeing abusive partners and seeking safety. During the years of status determination and the 21 months of permanent residence processing, children remain vulnerable to ongoing violence by abusive partners or extended family members. The delay provides the opportunity for abusers to use children to exert continuous coercive control over the victim. Fleeing to Canada has prevented physical violence from continuing, but delays in processing allow for psychological coercion and control to continue, and in some situations, physical violence to be transferred from mother to her children. The anguish our clients experience creates additional strains on their capacity to restart their lives in Canada. Many contemplate returning to face their persecutors and protect their children. As you can imagine, others live with feelings of extreme guilt while awaiting the outcome of their applications. All struggle with the negative mental health effects of knowing their families are in danger. We cannot expect symptoms of trauma to lessen and heal when we know the people we love are experiencing the violence once perpetrated upon us. The lasting damage to relationships cannot always be repaired, leading to higher rates of divorce and separation. Children, especially those separated during developing years and who have witnessed or experienced abuse, often have difficulties forming lasting relationships with their family after arrival. The trauma of violence and extended delays in obtaining safety is impacting the mental health of 2 generations. But what is so disheartening is that many of the administrative delays are unnecessary. Our clients have been asked to provide duplicate forms in addition to the forms filled out by the principal applicant in Canada. Extended security screenings for principal applicants delayed the issuing of permanent resident visas for children who would not be subject of such security screenings anyway. The limited options available to separated families, such as a temporary resident permit, are rarely available. Visa officers continue to refuse such applications despite evidence of immediate dangers posed to separated family members, even to children living in their own country of origin. In many cases, visa officers still consider lack of family ties in the country of origin as a deciding criteria in refusing a visitor visa, even where clear evidence of humanitarian considerations are provided. We recommend this committee consider the effects such policies have on families under Canada's humanitarian obligations. As a country which prides itself on understanding the importance of mental health for a productive and fair society, we ask that unnecessary delays negatively impacting mental health of refugees and their families, be removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. We will now proceed to our first round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Redekop. Mr. Redekop, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with the Fédération de Communautés Francophones. You mentioned student visas, and I know that there are problems with the postgraduate work program. The government tried to place a Band-Aid on the program a few months ago with the announcement of an extension of some work permits. But this past Friday, I put an order paper question into the House of Commons trying to get to the bottom of why certain postgrads were specifically excluded. And so my question is, do you agree that the Liberal government should not be specifically excluding any postgraduate work students at a time when we need these workers?
Thank you, Mr. Redekop, for the question. We are aware of the difficulties that some immigration candidates, applicants are experiencing. We know that more needs to be done. Canada needs to do better. And we are hoping that members of Parliament put forward the measures needed to prevent these backlogs in granting visas to foreign students in Canada.
Thank you. I want to turn now to Mr. Batty. Thank you for the work that International Christian Voice is doing in bringing persecuted Christian minorities to Canada. In my own riding of Saskatoon West, Canadian Aid to Persecuted Christians, which is run by your relative Nadeem Batty, is doing similar work, and I also want to thank him and his organization. Helping Christians is not one of those things that gets you front page headlines in the Toronto media elite or praised by the gatekeepers or woke folks, but there are still various terrorist organizations like the Taliban, the Iranian Republican Guard, Hamas, etc., that murder Christian minorities every day. And your own brother, you mentioned, was murdered. International Christian Voice now sponsors refugees in Canada. So we've heard from the Saskatoon and the Toronto Catholic Diocese that there are issues with this process at the Immigration Canada level and at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees level. And so regarding groups like minority Christians, have you seen specific problems that you've experienced with the UNHCR, and is there something that we should do, that Canada should do to fix that?
Thank you so much, Mr. Red. Yes, there is a problem with the UNHCR, especially as I mentioned here that when religious minorities apply for the immigration to UNHCR for seeking asylum or in Canada, they are less educated and they cannot present their case properly. But UNHCR having a issue that they want 100% all the evidence, which is they are failed to do this one because of their scenario in Pakistan, how they are persecuted there. And also there is biased decision making by the interpretations. When they are doing the interpretation with our community members, those are applying for asylum, they did not interpret properly. In result, they are being refused. I have my friend with me, he just came from the Thailand, and he is the witness when the refugee was asking, UNHCR asking him to be, I can speak English, I want to give him in English. He said, no. If you will interrupt to us, you will be 2 years more delay. So that kind of things is happening every day, and that is cause of result of refusal of our cases. And unfortunately, when our Canadian visa officer, they want to go for interview, they first see the files bringing from the UNHCR. And most of the things, they make a decision to see the file which they are doing, UNHCR is doing. They are just making to same way that file to see that one. That is the cause of refusals more.
So just so that I understand, so what you're saying is that the interpreters at the UNHCR are biased sometimes against certain minorities, like Christians, for example. That's essentially what you're saying. Now, interviews aren't always recorded. Do you think it would be a good thing for those interviews to be recorded all the time?
That will be helpful a lot to find out, especially when we apply for the judicial review or anything else to appeal the case. That will be helpful a lot to justify that either refugee has a problem or interpreter have a problem or either visa officer gave a wrong decision.
Now, a lot of the cases from Pakistan are dealt with at Singapore. And so I'm just curious to know if you have any information on the Singapore IRCC office on this issue of bias and minority Christians.
Yes, we have last few years we have several refusal cases from Singapore office, especially from Christian minorities people, and we appeal to several times IRCC, and I think IRCC is looking on that one. And no, it's a little bit better, but still it's need to be focused more on these issues.
So are there, do you have more examples of people who have been failed by this process?
Yes, there is one application was refused by recently from IRCC. The guy was a target to the extremists in Karachi, and he went to the hospital. He go through the crisis, but unfortunately, because of their circumstances, it doesn't allow him to give all the evidence for police report or other hospital report. Because we have Madam Chair also from Pakistan and other our honorable MPs. They knew that once person get accused, especially for the blasphemy law or other cases, they have no space. They are hiding day and night, and they cannot produce the proper evidence. Due to that lack of evidence, they are being failed. They never accepted that there is a problem when somebody accused due to this kind of blasphemy law or other religious persecution. They have no place anywhere.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kayabaga. Ms. Kayabaga, you will have 6 minutes. For your round of questioning, you can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start by thanking and welcoming all of our witnesses that have come to speak to us today. I will address my questions to Monsieur Meuluko.
Mr. Meuluku, my question is to you. I'll try to go quickly to get all my questions in, so if you wouldn't mind answering directly, that would help me. Today, Minister Fraser announced new measures making it possible for up to 500,000 people to come to Canada in 2025. In your comments, you talked about the 4.4% target, which you're saying is not enough. What measures would you like to see in this new announcement? And that 4.4% for the 500,000 people that will come up to 2025. What do you think that percentage should be? Thank you. With regard to the immigration target, the FCFA has said a number of times that a substantial increase in that percentage is needed. What we need is a corrective target. That 4.4% target has never been reached yet. The deadline seems to be put off constantly. So we need a corrective percentage, as it were, so that we can restore the demographic weight of la francophonie in Canada so that our francophone communities can survive. The francophonie issue in Canada is one of identity across the country. It is extremely important to us. What we would like is to see 12% in 2024, and that target to increase to 20% by 2036. Regarding the announcements made by Minister Fraser today, I will ask our Director General to comment on them because I think we have had an opportunity to hear what the Minister had to say today. Well, before Mr. Dupuy answers, could you give me some details on what do you think about C13, which is spending a lot of time in committee? What about the targets in that? You did say that it was taking too long in committee. Yes, it is spending a lot of time there. We, the Francophones, are waiting for elected members of parliament to pass C13 to strengthen the resources for communities and assist them in surviving. We are in a desperate situation. Our organizations are fragile. Francophone organizations are not doing well. And it is those organizations that provide French language services to communities. So as quickly as possible, they need to have people and resources. The bill needs to be passed as quickly as possible so that the federal government and its partners take action in those communities and ensure their survival. You said that Bill C13 is taking a long time in committee. It is. We are getting tired of waiting. We would have liked to see it come through as quickly as possible. And once again, we are imploring members to respond to the needs and requests of their Francophone constituents and move forward with C13 as quickly as possible. You talked about more visa offices. There is a visa office that opened in Yaoundé in Cameroon. What is your comment? How will that improve things? I don't know how much time I have, Madam Chair. If I do have more time, I would like to hear the answer on the percentage of the 500,000 refugees, immigrants rather, to come. I will answer on the Yaoundé office. We're very happy to see a new visa office being opened in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Central Africa. However, the information we have to date is not telling us whether that office is actually providing visa services. Visa applications still seem to be processed in Dakar, in Senegal, so we want to make sure that visa processing services will be offered in Yaoundé, we hope. Having two offices dealing with 16 countries is not much at all. Distances are vast, and traveling from Cotonou to Dakar could become a serious issue for a visa applicant who wants to come to Canada. If I may, I will give the floor to my colleague Alain Dupuy so he can answer on the 500,000. I think that Francophone Acadian communities are happy to see levels of immigration going up. We need to ensure that the percentage of Francophone immigrants increases as well. And that is the concern. When we look at the plan that is being tabled in Parliament, we just see an asterisk indicating 4.4%.
Is up for Ms. Kayabaga. You will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep. Mr. Brunel Desep, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Yes, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for this, these very important comments and the study that affects us all. Mr. Dupuy, do tell us whether you're satisfied with the 4.4% announced today, when I believe in your opening statement that percentage you stated should be far higher. 4.4% is no longer an appropriate target. When it was established in the early 2000s, that was because la francophonie in Canada accounted for 4.4% of Canada's population. But what we see in the official languages commissioner's figures, we need a higher target. 15, 20 years later, we're still talking about whether we might be able to reach 4.4%. There has been a significant decline in the demographic weight of francophones in Canada that affects our ability to live in French, our ability to exercise our rights as francophones in Canada, to deal with significant shortages in the number of teachers. We need at least 2,000 more francophone teachers in Canada outside Quebec to support immersion and French language schools. It's a crisis, and what we're asking this committee is to treat the crisis in the decline of French like other crises which have been dealt with in recent years, by giving it the priority that it requires, by being humane and using well thought out measures. But what we want is not a number that is shoehorned in at the bottom of a table, which will magically take us to 4.4%. What we need to say is exactly how many immigrants we will welcome as an absolute number, or at least a range with a minimum and maximum limit, which will meet the needs of francophones, which will also be associated with promotions in target countries like francophone countries in Africa. Bringing in people also means meeting the economic needs of francophone communities, which are often quite different from those of English-speaking communities. The entire approach needs to be reviewed, and what we would like to see is a new target as of 2024, and it needs to be at least 12% for the committee. Has the federal government ever achieved its targets for francophone immigration? No, never. There is an express entry program which you spoke about in your opening comments, and there is a backlog there too. When I look at the numbers, in 2021 I have 155,000 permanent residents, of which only 2,980 are francophones. That's 1.9% who are francophones through the express entry program. How can that be explained? And is it not something that illustrates how true your comments are, that special programs and a new approach is needed? Yes, the approach needs to be adapted to Canadian francophones. We did speak about the targets we would like to see. Canada has to do much better. We have a crying need for francophone immigrants. Thank you for allowing us to appear before you today and speak to elected officials. But what would be even better is if we didn't have to do this systematically and speak to members of parliament to hope before we can hope that targets would be met. What would be infinitely more desirable would be that regardless of the party in a government, all efforts would be made for these targets to be made in or out of respect for francophone communities and for francophones outside and inside Quebec. We are threatened, and measures must be taken, sound measures, emphatic and empathetic measures that will meet our needs. Today, as you said, the Express Entry program has only 1.9 odd francophones, 1.9% or so francophones. That is not enough. We need significant measures to stop the decline. I think that with Express Entry, the only way we'll see a program reform in that program for it to work for francophones is if we set a quota in absolute numbers of visas that would be granted to francophones each year, and that French language applications would be assessed in relation to one another. We also need promotion in source countries. Sometimes even entry express criteria for economic immigrants don't meet the economic categories that Francophone communities need. So that is an impediment. If we want to reform Express Entry for it to work for both languages, it needs to be adjusted.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their presentations. I just want to build on this conversation. Given that the government year after year has missed the target, and yet the immigration levels just came out again with the same old target, there's no new initiatives attached to it, there's no new approach to it. Based on the historical record, do you actually believe that the government will reach their 4.4 target?
On l'espère.
We hope so. And we are here to believe in the government's intentions and the good intentions of elected officials. What we hope to see once again is a strategic increase to ensure that the 4.4% target is actually reached in 2023, and that as of 2024, that target goes up to 12%, so that we can start to catch up on the stagnation and decline in the demographic weight that we've seen in Canadian Francophonie. One thing I would add is that we need separate programs. Those are the mistakes that have been made in the past couple of decades. Programs designed for the majority don't work for the minority, so it's not just changing the target. We need new mechanisms, programs, and tools that are adapted because the pools of immigrants aren't the same and the needs aren't the same.
Thank you very much. I was going to say that in addition to the target, you actually need substantive action. So I'm glad that you clarified that. If you have any submissions that you would like to provide to the committee on what specific actions the government should take to reach that target, please provide that to us so that we can make sure that is incorporated into our report as recommendations to the government. I'd like now to turn to Ms. Gilbert, and thank you, first of all, to you and your community for the great work that you do. Today, again, on the immigration levels numbers, the government is actually reducing the number of refugees coming to Canada at a time when there is a global humanitarian crisis. Instead of, in the very minimum, sustaining those numbers, the government is actually reducing it. I wonder, Ms. Gilbert, if you have any thoughts with respect to that, and what would that mean for the backlog and delays in processing, given that, especially right now, with the privately sponsored refugees, the wait time is at least 3 years.
Well, I think that is one of the concerns. Certainly, there is a need for people to come for work purposes, and but we also know that many people continue to require the protection of the Canadian government and need to resettle here as a result of persecution in their country of origin. So we would hope that the Canadian government will also raise the numbers of refugees accepted and also recognize that many people also apply under humanitarian and compassionate ground considerations as well. The individuals that we work with very often do come to Canada as workers at times and are really looking for opportunities to flee violence and also provide for their families. So we want to ensure that people who are able to come are able to understand and are able to be provided the information they need to make the best decisions to keep themselves safe and to ensure the well-being and safety of their children as well. And it's one of the most important goals of Legal Assistance of Windsor is ensuring that individuals have the information that they need so that they can make those decisions going forward.
In Canada, there are already over 500,000 people who are here as migrant workers or undocumented. That is to say, people who's lost their status for one reason or another. And with the immigration levels numbers, the government is actually silent on the undocumented workers that are here or undocumented people and the migrant workers. In your opinion, do you think that the government should actually put a laser focus on regularizing the people that are already here in Canada to meet our labor skills shortage? And that would include refugees who are here, people who came from a different country trying to seek refuge here in Canada. And Ms. Gilbert, and then I will go to Mr. Batty.
I think that many of the people that are here currently that have lost their status for a number of different reasons deserve to have the chance to make an application to remain in Canada and have contributed and continue to contribute to our economy and also have many different stories and many different reasons why they have to remain in Canada. Many of those have to do with extreme violence that they are experiencing in their country of origin. So allowing people the opportunity to know about and to have programs that are accessible to them and that they are able to access and follow through with is a really important, I think, message to be given to government.
Thank you, Mr. Batty, on the regularization of the people that are already here.
Sorry?
On the question around regularizing the people that are already here, given that there are over 500,000 people who are either undocumented or migrant workers here in Canada, do you think that the government should actually put a strong focus in regularizing them to meet the labor skill shortage?
I think, first of all, they need to be put to documentation that how many people are there, and priority should be given to those people, those are having skills or any talent in this country. Then they can be
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Bhatti. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. You will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to Ms. Rempel Garner. Ms. Rempel Garner, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Batty, historically, we have seen instances of bias particularly in the UNHCR refugee determination selection process, and you've described that. Would you recommend, as part of the government's solutions to addressing the backlogs, particularly in the privately sponsored refugee stream, that the government undertake an independent third-party audit of how bias may affect the wait times experienced by certain classes of refugees in the PSR program?
My recommendation to our visa office, especially in Singapore or other countries as well, that they have to do their independent study for PSR refugees. Most of the time they are getting consultation from the UNHCR, which is, I think, unfair for the refugees, for their biased decision, and they are follow up that UNHCR. They have to do independent study, and due to that study, they have to see different kind of level that where refugee is coming from, what is their persecution level, what kind of evidence they are coming, and.
So to be clear, your recommendation is to decouple Canada's review and selection process for the PSR stream from the UNHCR's process.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Would you also recommend to the government that they work with either sponsorship agreement holders or families, like groups of 5, to find ways to support groups like that have financially committed to sponsoring refugees, but now experience multi-year delays in seeing the refugees come to the country due to the backlog. What I'm getting at is this. I know that sometimes people just give up, right? People that have raised funds to sponsor a refugee, years after years have gone by, people just walk away from the commitment without hope. Would you recommend to the government to also be working with those people so that we're not losing that investment capacity, if you will, in sponsoring refugees due to the backlogs?
That will be excellent idea if they can come with a different program where they can, even group of 5 is doing their due diligence sponsorship, and they can fulfill the obligation of the sponsorship for 1 year, mostly they are doing. If they are able to do that one, that will be the excellent idea. Then they don't have to wait for the PSR. But main issue is that one delay. All the sponsorship agreement holders doing wonderful job, and they want to do more. If we can encourage all the SAW holders in Canada and supporting them by the government should support to them more and giving more avenue to them, they are doing excellent job.
What's the number one way to clear the backlog in the privately sponsored refugee stream, in your opinion?
I think first they have to add more human resources, like more staff need to be hired or can do the job. Secondly, they have to modernize the application system.
Can I ask one more question as well? The government has started to use artificial intelligence, if you will, in the screening of certain types of applications. Would you recommend to the government to ensure that bias against certain ethnic groups or other persecuted minorities is ensured to be removed from any bias and any algorithms that would be used to determine PSR status?
Yes, I recommend that government, when any visa officer is taking the interview, they have to see their ethnic and religious background, and they have to consider during the interview.
Okay. Do you see evidence right now that is actually contributing to the backlogs?
Not much. I think day by day we are going more in backlogs. I give you one example here. I submitted the one sponsorship application this year, and even up to October, I did not get the acknowledgement of application. So refugee will continue asking us, either do you submit the application, do you have any proof or whatever, and we don't have anything to respond to the refugee. So refugee is desperate and very disappointed that if it takes me 9 years to 1 year to get the application acknowledgement, how long it will take to get the process the application.
Time is up, Ms. Rempel-Garner. We will now proceed to Ms. Lalonde. Ms. Lalonde, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank each of the witnesses here today, be it those who are present on Zoom or in person. Thank you. For the FCFA, there is no doubt that I care deeply about la francophonie. Thank you for being here. Thank you for defending and supporting French and always showing up when we ask you to take part in panels like this. We are studying the backlog primarily. We are looking at the delays associated with applications and looking for solutions. One of my colleagues spoke about 2017 when the Express Entry program was set up, where additional points were given for immigrants who had solid skills in French. Now, with regard to what we're studying at the moment, could mechanisms like those, or rather do mechanisms like those, actually reduce the time it takes for Canada to welcome more candidates from Francophone countries? Thank you for the question, Ms. Lalonde. It's true that any initiative warrants study given the way things are. As my colleague Mr. Dupuy said, the importance of solutions developed by and for Francophones would lead to a substantial increase in Francophone immigration to Canada and in Francophone communities. That would be an excellent start to see a better capacity to work on the issue. And that capacity would need to be increased. Alain? I don't think there's a tremendous difference in the backlogs between applications by Francophones and Anglophones. We have talked about the processing capacity in Africa. There will be a new office in Yaoundé in Cameroon. But there are not many offices in Africa, and that is where we need to improve our processing capacity, since the pool of Francophone immigrants there is huge. But there are also delays by post-secondary institutions or delays for students applying to post-secondary institutions and needing student visas. Rather, we're also hearing Francophone employers saying they have a great deal of difficulty. They're losing confidence in the system. They want to bring in Francophone foreign workers, but it takes so long to do that. And we spend so long in raising awareness among employers and encouraging them to bring in Francophone workers. But the process is so lengthy, it becomes very difficult for us if the processing capacity issue isn't dealt with. It's very difficult for us to encourage employers to bring in workers or to try and bring in workers and so on. So what do you think this committee could do to work towards a solution? We agree, well, at least I agree with you, we need to increase capacity. I know that efforts were made during the pandemic, during extremely unusual conditions, but we will need to put forward solutions. So what would be the solutions that you suggest? Well, we have to see Francophone immigration as being specific to Francophones. It should not be included in the general immigration targets. It is crucial to undertake a process of reflection and put in place a strategy that targets Francophone immigration outside Quebec and makes it possible to maintain the vitality of Francophone communities outside Quebec. So what's needed is a process of reflection leading to a specific immigration program for immigrants in minority communities. That would be an excellent start. As Alain said, in the past, targets and immigrant pools in Francophone countries in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and Northern Africa, the Maghreb. We know how big the pool of Francophone immigrants is there.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaib for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, madame. J'ai pas beaucoup de temps.
Thank you. I only have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I do love seeing you, but I'll be very happy not to see you before this committee, because really what you've been doing for years, it seems to me, is preaching in the desert. People might hear you, but it doesn't lead to results. What is your relationship with the department's policy office dealing with Francophone immigration outside Quebec? Do you feel that you can speak to them and you're heard? Thank you for the question. I believe that today we do have avenues for communication. Mr. Dupuy will be able to confirm that. So there are means of communication, but we are still waiting for results. And I'll ask Mr. Dupuy to continue, because that's the kind of thing he does every day. Yes, Mr. Fraser's office is very much engaged. We're waiting for the promises in C13. We have excellent expectations of that policy. We're hoping to see a before and after. The goal of the immigration policy must be not only to reverse the decline, but to maintain a good percentage afterwards. For the past 50 years, we've had an Official Languages Act, and our communities have been declining for decades. So this means needed measures will have to be taken to overturn the decline. As a country, we need to say that we have linguistic duality in this country. We have two very diversified communities to welcome immigrants, but the Francophone side will need special help. Thank you. I do appreciate your answers. You mentioned sub-Saharan Africa and the Maghreb, North African countries, and you're saying there are no visa offices in those countries, insufficient visa offices. Yes, it's urgent. So even with the Yaoundé office, you can't process enough applications? As we said, at this point, we don't know whether the Yaoundé office in Cameroon is processing visa applications. But even if it is, that will not be sufficient. There will need to be a substantial increase in capacity. What about Francophone students from Africa? Have you seen that the rate of refusal or rejection of applications was very high? Yes, there is some change, but the rate of rejection is extremely high. Thank you.
Now end this panel with Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to go to Mr. Dupree, if I may, on that previous questions, because there are a lot of Francophones who are here, whose status may be running out or are undocumented. What do you think the government should do? Should they be regularizing those individuals?
Je pense que
I think they should. During the pandemic, there was a temporary bridging program for temporary residents to lead to permanent residence. There were thousands of applications, but they could not all be processed quickly enough to get them all through during the pandemic. So we'll see the impact of this year and next year. The idea of a permanent bridge for Francophones between temporary and permanent residents should be explored in our view. And why not much faster bridges for students who graduate with Canadian degrees? We ask students to come here and prove that they'll be returning to their own countries. But for Francophones, this runs totally counter to the very underpinning of the Francophone immigration approach that we should have.
The other piece, of course, is that with the other studies, we are, and IRCC has admitted that there is discrimination and racism within IRCC, and we are seeing deplorable numbers for Francophone African students, for example. So specifically related to systemic issues within the system, what do you think the government should do to ensure that we meet the targets?
Votre question est extrêmement importante.
Your question is a very important one. The issue of discrimination and racism is one that is there, and we need to address it as quickly as possible to ensure that applications are processed in an impartial, fair, and equitable fashion to foster immigration. This is the first signal that the first message we send to visa applicants. If at the outset the visa application is processed in a biased way, how is that going to reflect, and what impression will the applicant have of being received and accepted in Canada? So there need to be far more equitable mechanisms. The government needs to do better with more equitable measures. Thank you, Madam Chair.
With that, this first panel comes to an end. On behalf of the members of this committee, I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. We will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that we can get the witnesses for the second panel. Thank you. Meeting is suspended. Welcome back to the meeting for our second panel. For this panel, we are joined by CIMM Desire, Executive Director, Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership. We are also joined by Laura Schmitz, Immigration and Refugee Lawyer, representing Race and Company LLP. And our third witness for today is Beth Potter, President and Chief Executive Officer from Tourism Industry Association of Canada. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and we will start with Mr. Desire, representing Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership. The floor is yours. You can please begin. You will have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon. Mon nom est Saint-Phar Désir.
My name is Saint-Phar Désir. I'm the Executive Director of the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership and a member of the OLIP Secretariat and a member of CSOC. I'm not here necessarily to speak for OLIP. I would have liked to present you with a brief, but I didn't have time to prepare one, unfortunately. So I am here to say that we have indeed received information from a number of clients, many of our clients, concerned about delays in processing of their applications. We have information from Eastern Ontario and places like Hawkesbury, Vankleek Hill, employers who are unable to fill positions because of the time it takes for applications to be processed. We believe it would be good to speed up processing times, and we believe that due to COVID, there were difficulties in processing applications. Now that the pandemic is done, we are hoping that more people will be taken on to process applications. A lot of people had to leave their positions because of COVID and have not come back to those positions. We are Francophone minority communities, and it is very important for us to bring in immigrants who do speak French so that we can increase the number of Francophones in minority linguistic regions. This will help us a great deal. It will help us a great deal to have processing times brought down, and we would be greatly appreciative if this could be done quickly, especially since we have an increasing number of people who are asking to come to Canada. The other aspect of the issue is students, Francophone students from sub-Saharan Africa. They are also having difficulty in getting their applications processed within what I would call a reasonable period. We would like the Department of Immigration to have all the resources it needs to hire more people so that the applications of Francophones can be processed much more quickly.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Laura Schmitz, Immigration and Refugee Lawyer, representing Race and Company LLP. Ms. Schmitz, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today on these important issues, namely immigration application backlogs and processing times in Canada. My name is Laura Schmitz, and I'm an immigration and refugee lawyer with Race and Company LLP. In my practice, I primarily serve clients throughout the Sea to Sky corridor in British Columbia and outside of Canada. I was called to the bar in 2020, so the majority of my experience as a practicing lawyer has involved navigating the immigration backlog, impacted in large part by the uncertainties of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is in Canada's best interests for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada to continue to tackle the backlog and achieve greater transparency and functioning in order to reunite families, bring skilled immigrants and workers to fill growing job vacancies due to our aging population, promote economic recovery, and revive Canada's immigration system and reputation in accordance with the legislative objectives of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. At the beginning of 2022, the backlog was estimated at approximately 1.8 million applications, including citizenship, permanent residence, and temporary residence. As the backlog grew, I recognized growing frustration, anxiety, and even despair from current clients and prospective clients regarding increased and frequently unknown processing times. While Canada and the world face unprecedented uncertainty throughout the early stages of the pandemic, essentially grinding Canada's immigration system to a halt, by 2022, patience from applicants and representatives for solutions to the growing backlog was wearing thin. It was clear to me that the integrity of Canada's immigration system was being jeopardized by the backlog, particularly in light of a lack of transparency and an inability to obtain application status updates through web form requests. Along with other advocates, I aimed to draw more attention to the issue and joined calls for greater transparency on the backlog and efforts to reduce it. In order to maintain Canada's international reputation as a top choice for foreign nationals to come to this country temporarily and or permanently, it is critical that the government respond with demonstrated actions. On June 25, 2022, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the creation of a ministerial task force to help reduce application backlogs and improve customer service. One welcome result of this task force is that IRCC has started to publish monthly data to help inform Canadians and prospective Canadians on the status of the backlog and forecast what the backlog is expected to look like in the coming months. Another positive development this year was the resumption of express entry draws in July. Express entry all program draws were paused for 18 months from December of 2020 until July of 2022 due to the backlog. Express entry is crucial to Canada's immigration system as one of the main pathways that skilled immigrants use to immigrate to Canada, and its proper functioning is critical to upholding Canada's international reputation as an attractive destination for skilled immigrants and their families. According to the most recent data released by IRCC on September 30th, 2022, there are currently 2.6 million applications in IRCC's application inventories. 1.11 million of these applications fall within service standards, and 1.49 million applications are in backlog or exceeding service standards. The majority of the applications in backlog are for temporary residence, followed by permanent residence and citizenship. The Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Sean Fraser, has indicated that Canada will strengthen its immigration system, reduce application backlogs, and improve client experience by modernizing the system. IRCC announced that starting on September 23, 2022, the department would be transitioning to 100% digital applications for most permanent residency programs. While advocates are open to IRCC's modernization efforts and want to work with IRCC to improve the current status quo through fair and efficient procedures, confidence in modernization efforts is jeopardized by frequent portal glitches and technical issues, which are widely reported by immigration lawyers. IRCC's website indicates that technical issues can be addressed by submitting a web form. However, since the pandemic, web form requests typically result in extremely delayed generic responses. In order to truly modernize the system and restore confidence in the department, IRCC could look into implementing live technical support, particularly in this period of transition. This could benefit IRCC because the department could more quickly and easily become aware of glitches and work to fix them, which is important in the long term, while also ensuring that applicants and their representatives can submit important applications efficiently in the short term. It is clear from the numbers that backlog reduction efforts must continue in order for Canada to maximize the social, cultural, and economic benefits of immigration, a stated objective of the IRPA. I remain optimistic that the government is prioritizing this objective through its efforts to reduce the backlog in consultation with advocates who use these systems daily in order to serve current and future temporary and permanent residents and citizens of Canada. Thank you again for inviting me to speak today.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Beth Potter, President and Chief Executive Officer from Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Ms. Potter, floor is yours. You can please begin.
Madame la Présidente et chers...
Madam Chair, committee members, I would like to thank you for inviting me here today. I'm Beth Potter, and I'm the President and CEO of the Association de l'Industrie Touristique du Canada, the Canadian tourism industry.
TIAC is the national advocate for tourism in Canada. On behalf of thousands of tourism businesses, we promote policies, programs, and other initiatives that foster the sector's growth. Tourism matters. It enables social, economic development, job creation, and poverty reduction. This drives prosperity and provides unique opportunities to women, minorities, and young people. The benefits spread far beyond direct GDP impact and employment. The indirect gains extend through the entire travel ecosystem and supply chains to other sectors. Tourism businesses incurred significant debt to get through the pandemic. Despite some improvement over the summer period, they continue to struggle financially. They face barriers to attracting investment, disruptions in supply chains, inflation at a 40-year high, and rising interest rates are now also impacting their businesses. The shortage of labor in virtually all tourism sectors has long been identified as a substantial barrier to industry growth. While the dearth in supply of workers predates the pandemic, COVID vastly compounded the problem. Today, our businesses have considerably bigger challenges attracting and retaining the necessary workforce to fully run their operations. In our recent submission to Minister Boissonnault for a new federal tourism growth strategy, we outlined 4 key priority pillars to help tourism recover from COVID and achieve its full potential. Among those pillars was the need to develop a comprehensive strategy specifically to attract and retain a sustainable tourism workforce. We identified labor as a key priority because the recovery and growth of tourism largely hinges on addressing the significant labor shortages that exist. The most recent estimates suggest that the sector has some 230,000 vacant positions. And to meet growth forecasts as travel resumes, we will need to employ more than 900,000 more people in the next 8 years. Among our recommendations were the need to launch targeted recruitment campaigns and a specific Indigenous workforce strategy. We also recommended increasing the number of high school programs, modernizing post-secondary programs, launching comprehensive national tourism job-ready programs, as well as investing in skills development. As measures we believe could be actioned in the short term, we recommended prioritizing tourism and creating efficiency with the temporary foreign worker program, adjusting policies within existing federal and provincial immigration streams to increase the number of workers assigned to tourism, and increase opportunities for international students. Longer term, we recommended working towards creating a dedicated tourism and hospitality immigration stream with a pathway to permanent residency, as well as for governments to invest in affordable housing in close proximity to major destinations. With that background, I now turn my focus specifically to the topic of the committee's study, application backlogs and processing time for all immigration streams at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. To this, I share the following. While I understand the fundamentals on how and why such a massive backlog could accumulate and why there are now significant processing delays, I cannot help but voice my disappointment. IRCC provides regular updates on its website, and a couple of days ago it noted 2.6 million in the total number of applications in all of its inventories. Of those, 1.1 million were considered within service standards, so 1.5 million applications are considered in backlog. I am particularly concerned about the impact this situation is having on our tourism sector and on our drive to build forward from the pandemic. As the sector that was first hit and hardest hit, we fought hard just to survive through COVID. As I have already said, we continue to struggle financially. Just when things seem to be improving over the summer and have begun normalizing somewhat after more than 2 years of hardship, it is deeply discouraging, on top of it all, to now have to contend with these issues related to immigration and processing delays. I have heard from many of our members, businesses across the country, about their difficulty getting their temporary foreign worker applications approved and permits issued. And I've also heard of many cases where foreign business travelers could not get their visas in time to attend important business events here in Canada. This all hinders the tourism sector's ability to reach its full potential and just compounds the reputational damage our sector has already suffered because of the lockdowns, restrictions, other border, vaccine, and masking requirements over the last 30 months. It is critically important to our sector that we not only deal with these backlogs quickly.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Potter. Time is up. You will get an opportunity once we move to our round of questioning. We will begin our first round with Mr. McGoy. Mr. McGoy, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank our witnesses for being here today as well, but I'd like to table the following motion with the committee just to start off, that the committee write to the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer to request a costing update to the November 2018 report on irregular migration across Canada's southern border. And my office will send the text in both official languages to the clerk so it can be distributed to the committee. Thank you. As I say, I want to thank the witnesses for being here, but I want to ask you, Ms. Potter, I've had a number of people in the tourism industry, of course, call me and a number of our colleagues in all parties. And the Liberals have finally lifted the remaining border restrictions and dropped the ArriveCan app. So, and international tourists are starting to come back to Canada. So, for those countries that have travel visa requirements, have any of your stakeholders raised concerns about the timeliness of approval for those travel visas? You referred to it. I just wonder if you could expand on that.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the question. And through the chair, I will say that the processing time and the backlog on travel visas has actually had an impact. We have heard from not only businesses that or travelers that were trying to attend business events and business meetings, but it's also been a bit of a challenge for some of the tour operators getting international groups into Canada. So these are, this is money we're leaving on the table as far as the tourism industry is concerned, and it just adds to the hardship of the businesses within the industry.
Right, thank you. You mentioned you used the term disappointment at the 1.5 million that are outside of even the regular 1.1 million that are still okay in the backlog. But across the whole tourism sector, whether it's hotels or fishing lodges, hunting and fishing lodges, airlines, shops, restaurants, airports, particularly, is there one industry, one sector that you think is having a greater labor shortage than others?
And thank you again for the question, but certainly we're seeing that the hotel sector and the hospitality sector, so restaurants, are seeing the largest number of shortages across the way. Within the hotel sector, one of the anecdotes that you may have heard yourself within your own riding is that hotels are full. And they're not full. They're only operating at a reduced capacity because they don't have the staff to service the clients. And so, and you will see across the country in almost every riding that restaurants are not operating on full hours. They're closed certain days. They're only operating dinner service, or only not operating lunch service. And this is compounding to the financial rebuild of the industry.
I'm just wondering if you could expand. Thank you. I just wondered if you could expand on your interactions with the duty-free shops along our borders.
Well, certainly the duty-free stores had a huge impact because the borders were closed for almost 2 years, and people going across. They're a one-way. They're a one-way business. If you're leaving Canada, then you can go and shop there. So they certainly did have a huge impact, and it will be. It was a big hit for a lot of businesses in border towns. From one end of the country to the other.
I'm just wondering what specific immigration streams do your stakeholders use, and are there specific recommendations you've received from them on how the IRCC could provide more predictability for employers and their workers? Just if you could expand on the number of streams that you have and any suggestions that they might have.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. There are three areas that we'd like to focus on. One is the temporary foreign worker program, and if we could expand the tourism NOT codes that are eligible for that, remove the LMIA requirements and the application fee, as well as waiving the 30-day job posting requirement, especially in this particular environment. Those would be specific recommendations that we would make to that. Within the provincial nominee program, we would like to see increased targets that would allow key regions and sectors by working with the provinces to expand the in-demand skills stream to their provincial nominee programs. And then on the express entry, Agri-Food was about to launch a pilot program, and we would like to see a similar pilot program launched for the tourism industry that would focus on bringing in individuals into those positions.
Just in time, have any provinces designated the tourism sector as a priority under their own provincial nominee programs that you know of?
Off the top of my head, I believe that, you know what, I would have to get back to you on that. Thank you.
And the other one is, I would agree with you on this temporary foreign worker program. The labor shortage in the tourism industry, you know, kind of aren't new. But I look at the TFWP worker program for permanent full-time positions as a Band-Aid rather than a solution. Number one, I never have liked the terminology, but what's the best way for the IRCC to provide a pathway for permanent residency for those working in that tourism sector?
So one is acknowledging that the tourism industry does fulfill a needed position within the economy, and that those positions are that are filled through the temporary foreign worker program.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Potter. Time is up for Mr. McGuire, and maybe you will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question will go to Mr. Desir. Mr. Desir, when we look at the BC Francophonie community, is a very vibrant community in British Columbia. And when we talk about strengthening the diversity of British Columbia, the diversity of Canada, 4.4% of the Francophonie immigration outside of Quebec is very important, near and dear to me and the BC Francophonie community in British Columbia. With the report that is out today, and government has ensured that we will be able to meet that 4.4% requirement. Would you comment on that? And also, what else can be done from the traditional ways of immigration to achieve those targets?
Cela fait quand même depuis 2007.
I have been back in Canada since 2007, and we've been working on increasing the number of Francophones in minority language communities. The 4.4% target, well, we've been talking about it for years, but we don't seem to be able to reach it. In my view, one of the reasons that makes us unable to reach it is that the majority of Francophones come from sub-Saharan countries in Africa, and those countries have a very few visa offices serving them. We believe that the number of visa offices needs to be increased, and Canada should also make it easier for people to come under programs like those allowing Francophones to enter Canada quickly when they have a job offer. But that program is not working the way it should, because backlogs being what they are, employers cancel the employment offer if people don't get their visas in time. One solution, in my view, would be to increase the number of visa offices serving Francophone areas and reducing the time it takes to process Francophone applications.
Thank you. And my next question, Madam Chair, is going to go to Ms. Laura Smith. Ms. Smith, you talked about the task force to address the immigration-related delays. And the minister has took an action and have hired 1,250 new employees. We will hire by the end of the fall. And what is your comment about that? Would it help to mitigate this backlog problems that we have?
Yes, I definitely believe that hiring new IRCC staff will help and should help with this backlog. However, I believe that advocates and applicants need to be updated on the status of that progress. So, you know, it's one thing to promise to hire these new employees. It's another thing to demonstrate to stakeholders how that is going to prevent further backlogs as well as address the current backlog. So it's very important to improve transparency and demonstrate how these new hires will improve the current situation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My next question goes to Ms. Potter. Ms. Potter, we are facing a similar situation in British Columbia when, you know, I recently have come to have an issue that one of the Punjabi filmmakers, they want to come in here. So if they apply for the work permit, there's no issues. All these artists that are coming in, they get the visa under the work permit. But when they come to do the reconnaissance first to see if the project is feasible and to see the locations, and then the visas are rejected because they can only come on a temporary visitor visa. Would you be able to comment how this process can be improved so we have more people get approved, particularly when it comes to tourism and hospitality industry?
So just for clarification, you're asking for traveler visas?
Yes.
Yes. So the traveler visas, I mean, one, there is, there's a process that they go through that allows for the government to vet them. And so if they have received a traveler visa, then the idea of extending that traveler visa, if they have a return ticket, is something that we can absolutely prioritize. If they're looking to kind of transfer that traveler visa into a worker visa. Again, there is a process in place that should allow for that to happen, and that worker visas should be, as we were looking at them, we would like to see worker visas extended. So if they're coming in on a temporary foreign worker visa right now, they can come in for I believe it's for 1 year. If we can extend work visas from 2 years to 4 years, and provide options for renewal, that would certainly assist those individuals coming in with work in mind.
Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaep for 6 minutes. Mr. Brunel Desaep, you can please begin.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all witnesses who are with us today. Mr. Désir, I was listening to you speak, and I found your comments very interesting. For the committee's benefit, are you aware whether the federal government has reached its 4.4% Francophone immigration target? Has it ever reached it? No. It's important to make a note of that. Could you please explain to the committee how a minority community like Francophones outside Quebec are more deeply affected by processing, overly long processing times than majority immigrants? It's very important for us to encourage Francophones to come here. The vitality of our Francophone minority communities depends on it. But most Francophone immigrants come from sub-Saharan countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There are very few visa processing centers. So there's always a much smaller number actually able to come. People often have serious problems in coming here. Our students are told that they're unable to prove that they will return to their countries of origin. And yet, we want them to come and study here so that they will stay here. So there is a significant disparity between what we want and are asking for and what visa officers are telling students applying to come here. People in visa offices just have a script and a process, and they have no choice but to work on that. Yes, I'm working on this hard in a report submitted by the committee on unfair treatment for some categories of foreign students. We see there is a tremendous disparity between Francophone students from Africa applying for student visas and others. The government did admit that there was racism in the system leading to inequity, and the government was working on it. Now, for the purposes of this study, the government has admitted that there was racism within the IRCC. Is that racism affecting the time it takes to process applications for people from sub-Saharan Africa and North African countries? Yes, absolutely. It is affecting the time it takes to deliver visas to foreign students and even for people coming here to work. Thank you, Mr. Desir. Ms. Potter. Good afternoon. Many people in Quebec are saying it is, and you know this, very difficult for temporary foreign workers to come. If people didn't have to submit the market study form, it would make life a lot easier. Do you agree?
It extends the time period in which it takes to get the program or the application through. The cost that's associated with it is challenging for a lot of businesses, and the 30-day wait on advertising the position, especially in this climate, seems redundant.
Parce que ce qu'on nous répond,
because what we're being told is that the labor market assessment has to be submitted because they don't want immigrants to take the position of a good Canadian. That's what we're being told. And yet there's a labor shortage. And we want to get immigration levels up to help with that labor shortage. So perhaps it would be a good time to set aside the LMAs and bring them back at a better time.
Absolutely agree with that.
Merci beaucoup. Vous avez parlé de rétention.
Thank you. You also talked about retention. I know that this doesn't pertain to the study necessarily, but you talked about retaining staff. There has still been no reform of the EI system. Does that fact, and given that so many people in the tourism industry are seasonal workers, they end up falling into the black hole and stay away from the tourism industry as a result because they want year-round jobs. Otherwise, they end up in the EI black hole. Is this one of the reasons you can't retain workers?
Reasons. Certainly, seasonality adds a complication to the hiring process within our industry. But the other thing that I would point out is that tourism is a global event, or it's a global sport. And we actually move our workforce around the globe. And so to be able to bring staff in for seasonality, to bring in staff that follow the season. So if I'm talking about, staff with special skills like, whitewater guides, they have certain skills and they follow the season around the globe, the ski industry as well. And so I don't know if the temporary foreign worker is the best tool to bring those folks in on a seasonal basis, but it is the tool that we have right now.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Up.
Je suis désolé.
We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all the witnesses. My first question is to Mr. Desir. From our previous panel, the suggestion was that the government should, in fact, up the 4.4% target to 12%, and so as to restore the missed targets over the years. Is that something that you would support?
Effectivement, c'est quelque chose.
Yes, this is something we support, as does the FCFA. The Francophone communities want to see a higher percentage so that we get a larger number of Francophones to make up for the lower numbers we've seen over the past decade and more.
On that, the other aspect of it is this. We have a large number of people that are already here in Canada, both migrant workers, students, as well as undocumented individuals, many of whom would fall into the Francophone speaking community members. Should the government be bringing forward an immigration measure to regularize those individuals?
Certainement, avec
Certainly. This is something we are requesting from the IRCC. This would be important to people already here, and it would be a very good thing to regularize people already in the country, even temporary workers. It would be great to regularize their situations.
Thank you very much. Just bringing a similar question then to Ms. Potter. Given that the labor skill shortage in the tourism sector, and while I understand you're pushing for a temporary foreign workers scheme to be expanded, the other reality, of course, is that there are a large number of people that are already here. Some of them lost status over the COVID period. Some of them are, in fact, from the tourism sector because of the downturn with the jobs and the closures that were required. They then lost their status. So there are people who are ready to work, but because they don't have the status, they can't work. Do you think that the government should be regularizing them? Should that not be a pool that we should actually absolutely try and target to meet the labor skill shortage?
Well, certainly if we've got a labor pool that is already invested in our industry here in Canada and ready to work, absolutely.
So would you call for the government to regularize undocumented and migrant workers, people with temporary status that are already here in Canada?
You know, as part of a series of other measures that we are calling for the government to do, that can be included for sure.
Thank you very much. I can tell you in that pool, there are in fact healthcare workers, caregivers who's come to Canada and undertaken the work to get their skill set to become a nurse in the healthcare sector. But because of immigration rules, they can only work for that specific employer. They can't go work for anyone else, so therefore they can't meet the shortage in our healthcare system. That's just one example. So there are many people who are ready and willing and able to do this work, but unable to do so because of immigration issues. I'd like to turn to Ms. Schmitz. On the processing delay issue. One of the things that government always like to do is that they say they will bring in new resources to target new applications. But meanwhile, the ones and the people who's already applied are just stuck there, and there's no focus in addressing that backlog. So to that end, what are your thoughts on that, and what should the government do? Because otherwise, all those people who's already in the system, the 1.5 million people minimum, are just stuck in the system waiting and waiting and waiting.
Again, I think, well, thank you for your question. I do believe it's a question of transparency again. You know, if the government is stating that they will address these backlogs through certain measures, but we see that people who are submitting applications more recently than those who submitted applications at the peak height of the pandemic and have not heard anything about those applications have no idea the status of those applications. Those resources in part need to basically provide more transparency about how the backlog is being dealt with. You know, if someone submits their application currently, in November of 2022, how long is it going to take for that person's application to be processed? And then how are we addressing those people who submitted their applications in March of 2020 and are still waiting for a response?
Well, thank you for that. The reality is that when the government makes these new announcements, what they say is that these new applications will meet the target, and they say nothing about the people that are stuck in the backlog. In fact, with caregivers, there actually hasn't been any processing since 2019 in the caregiver stream, as an example. So people are just really basically stuck there. We speak about transparency, and the reality is opaque. The system is opaque. Should the government actually put in place a independent ombudsperson so that we can trust the information that's being put out and what's going on in the system?
Absolutely. I think it's very important that applicants are able to receive specific responses about their current applications. It is not enough to provide a status update tool or some other kind of generic tool. It is important that applicants are able to receive specific updates. And if that means that an independent ombudsman must facilitate some kind of process to ensure that, then I believe it should happen.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. Now we will proceed to our second round, and we will begin that with Mr. Kimmick. Mr. Kimmick, you will have 4 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to start with Laura Shemich. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I have the same problem. You described in your opening statement almost heroic attempt by the Government of Canada's IRCC department to clear the 2.6 million backlog. This is a department has 30% more staff than it did in 2016. It has more than doubled its budget, and the backlog has continued to grow. And in your opening statement, you also said what's going on is jeopardizing Canada's immigration system. So how do we square these two statements, your description and the fact the system is being jeopardized? What did you mean?
I believe so. As someone who is a fairly new lawyer, my experience with Canada's immigration system has primarily been one of clients expressing their frustration and uncertainty with this system. Basically, the past year, there has been a lot of advocacy around from lawyers and other advocates asking for solutions and greater transparency. I believe it is important to recognize that the government is making certain attempts to improve the situation while also being critical of some of those measures and the progress. So, for example, while it is very possible that a modernized system will lead to greater efficiency, it is still important to acknowledge that there are significant issues with the technology. And so to basically force representatives to move towards online portals that have either not been tested properly or have a lack of technical support, then that's going to basically eliminate that progress that could happen through modernization.
I think you also talked about streams, and a lot of witnesses are talking about more streams. Would adding yet more streams to the system make it more complicated or less complicated?
I think it depends what maybe industries you're talking about or what those streams would be used as for a solution. So, for example, I do work in Whistler, Canada, where there is a heavy reliance on tourism. And so I agree with many of Ms. Potter's remarks that, there are certain programs and or processes that small businesses and also large businesses and employers have to move through in order to bring the labor force that they need to support those businesses. And unfortunately, a lot of those processes actually create barriers to those businesses being able to get the labor that they need. So I think, yes, we could create new streams, but it's a more complicated question than that, in my opinion.
So perfect. Monsieur Désir, vous avez mentionné.
Mr. Désir, when testifying, you said that IRCC should have more staff. That department has hired more than 30% new staff. We have doubled their budget, and the backlogs are still going up. Should we be giving yet more resources to the department, or is there simply a systemic problem within the department? You're talking about 2016. There was a pandemic for 2 years, and that had an impact. I don't know if the 30% staff increase is still there. So we'll have to see where the department is now, because given what I understand.
Mr. Kimmick, we will now proceed to Mr. Al-Khouri. Mr. Al-Khouri, you will have 4 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. My first question is to Mr. Desir. Mr. Desir, do you think it would be good for us to choose applicants on economic grounds? Could you tell us more about that? It's a very good thing to be able to select people who can come to Canada for economic reasons and find jobs quickly. But the problem with the system is that employers need somebody yesterday, not in 10 days. So we need to find a means to speed up the application processing so that employers can actually get people on time when they need them. We were told, for example, that it would take 4 weeks to 4 months to process someone, but then it takes more than 8 months. And at that point, the employer is discouraged and moves on. It would be good to have systems that make it possible to bring people in quickly. Thank you. I listened carefully to your opening comments. What is the main thing you would like to see in the documents you set out, you spoke about? Could you please repeat the question? I didn't understand it very well. I would like to know, what is the main notion that you would like to see incorporated into the documents that you spoke of in your opening remarks? I think what's most important to me is to promote and foster immigrants from countries where there are a lot of Francophones, countries in Africa. We therefore need more visa offices. We also need to facilitate the way in for foreign students. They should no longer be asked to prove that they will be going back to their countries of origin after studying, since actually we don't want them to do that. My question is to Ms. Shemech.
Clear for you that the increasing in demand of applicant is not the same. In 2015, we had 270,000 applications. In 2022, we have 431,000 applications. And that explains clearly why we have more resources. Thank you. But my question to you now is, ma question pour vous donc.
So my question to you is this. In an article dating back to March, you said you were in favor of authorizing emergency trips between Canada and Ukraine. Could you tell us more about those measures? And would those be justified in spite of the existing backlogs? Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of your question?
Dans un article.
In an article published in March, you said that it was a good thing that Ukrainians were emergency travel was permitted between Ukraine and Canada. Could you tell us more about those emergency travel measures and what made them justified in spite of the existing backlogs?
I believe that those circumstances were very dire, and so those measures came into place in order to facilitate helping people during a humanitarian crisis, as Canada has done in the past. I believe that I also was critical of the fact that those measures have not been extended to other communities and other people of different nationalities. And so it is a complicated question. I don't believe that.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Al-Khouri. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep for 2 minutes. Mr. Brunel Desep, you can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Al-Khouri has just inspired me. Ms. Shemich, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, you said not so long ago, well, and you have some experience with IRCC, when the Afghan crisis happened, when the Ukrainian crisis happened, we know there'll be an increasing number of crises, be it because of weather events or armed conflict. Did it not have a direct impact on backlogs for the Afghan crisis? 15% or 20% of IRCC officers were focused solely on that region.
And can you please clarify your question?
Oui.
When an international crisis like the crisis in Afghanistan happens, do you believe that backlogs in all other programs increase because a large number of IRCC officers focus on the region in crisis and are taken away from focusing on other regions?
Yes, my understanding is that does occur, and I believe that other colleagues of mine in the immigration bar have suggested that perhaps IRCC has an emergency task force that is able to deal with those special circumstances that undoubtedly will arise in the future, while not taking away those resources from our everyday programs that need to properly function moving forward, and absolutely to continue to tackle this backlog.
Merci beaucoup. D'ailleurs,
Thank you. I had even suggested an emergency plan to the government, but I never had a response from the minister. More and more people are saying that the IRCC needs emergency measures when there's an international crisis. Do I have any time left, Madam Chair? Thank you to all witnesses. Your presence today is very much appreciated.
Ms. Kwan, you will have 2 minutes for your round of questioning. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Mr. Desir. The issue, of course, is racism within IRCC, systemic racism, the processing delay, and a variety of other issues, not the least of which is the government missing the targets for Francophone immigrants to Canada. Given this is the state of play, do you think that Canada or the Canadian government should put in place an independent ombudsperson to look at all of these problems and issues and to make recommendations for government to take action?
C'est toujours une bonne personne.
Well, it's always a good decision to have an ombudsman. But I'm not in a position to prove that these delays are actually because of racism and not because of existing regulations. For example, for foreign students, they're told they can't prove, they're not proving that they're going to return to their countries of origin, regardless of where the application comes from. The reason for rejection is that they're not proving they're going to go back to their countries of origin. In my view, that is not necessarily racism, but it's out of line with what we want them to do. We want them to come to Canada and stay in Canada. So when it comes to the backlog of people applying for permanent residency, the major problem, to my mind, is the lack of visa offices. There aren't enough. So an ombudsman might be a good thing.
Yeah, on the issue around racism and discrimination, we learned from the other study that there are a number of different factors in play, including immigration policies that biases against individuals from certain countries because inherently the requirements for them to prove that they will return to their country of origin is heightened and increased. And so to address that systemic issue, something needs to be done if we want to bring equalization to that question. And so, of course, that would be a thing to which I think an independent ombudsperson should look
Sorry
into.
for interrupting, Ms. Kwan. Time is up. Time is up for this panel, and on behalf of all the members of this committee, I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. If there is something which you would like to bring to the notice of the members and you were not able to discuss because of less time, you can always send a written submission to the clerk of the committee, and we will take that into consideration while we go through the draft report. So just to for the information of the members, our next meeting will take place on Friday, and where we will complete the draft report consideration of differential outcomes. On the request of the analyst, we will have to use version 3 because it can be very confusing to follow that. So just so that to make sure we can complete that on Friday, please go through version 3 and be ready. We will be going through version 3 of the report. Okay? With that, the meeting is adjourned, and see you all on Friday.